gruff. This is my way of saying to you, I don't think I can compete with the talking dog. But it's nice to be here this morning, and I'm glad that you're here. We're in the second week here at Trinity Church of this financial stewardship emphasis, raising money for the capital needs of the building as well as for the ministry budget for the coming year. So I've been asked to do a bit of heavy lifting here this morning on that, and I'm happy to do that. I want to talk to you on the topic of putting money in its place. Because it's pretty obvious that left to its own devices, money will always want to run the show. And this putting money in its place, I think, means at least two things. It means not letting money and your concerns about money take over your life. And for followers of Jesus, it means being generous and using the money that you do have to bless others and to make good things happen. So normally when I'm preparing a sermon, I write across the top of the page, goal, or goals, and I write down a statement. What is my goal in preaching this sermon? What do I hope happens as a result, or what's my purpose? And anyway, I have two goals here for this sermon. I might as well tip you out on it in case you missed the point. The first is to encourage generosity as an aspect of discipleship and spiritual growth in our lives, learning on a continuing basis to be generous people because we're learning to follow Jesus. And then the second goal is to encourage you to give generously to this financial campaign to support the ministry of this church. You understand this is important work that goes on in this place, and as we've often said down through the years here, money costs ministry. Ministry costs money. Ministry costs money, and good ministry costs more. So we listen to these words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, where he said, no one can serve two masters. You'll hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. And then he made his point. He said, so if you're learning to follow me, you need to understand that you can't serve both God and money. You'll be faithful to one and unfaithful to the other. You can't have two centers in your life. You can't serve both God and money. And it's interesting that Jesus never said that about anything else. Of all the things he talked about in proclaiming his message of God's kingdom and what that life was like, he named a lot of issues, he talked about a lot of things, but he never ever set something else up over in opposition to God the way he does in this statement with money. So the question is, why would Jesus say something like that? And the answer, of course, is simply because Jesus knows that money is an issue. Money's a concern. Jesus understands, not only in our culture, but back in that day when he was talking to people who were more on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis than most of us. Jesus understands the busyness and the pressures of life and the concern to make sure that we have enough money, that we will have enough to live on to support our families and to provide for our retirement. And maybe a few of the things that add some joy and peace and contentment to life as well. Jesus knows that earning money takes a lot of time and work. He knows that we spend a lot of time and energy thinking about how to spend our money, how to save it, how to be wise with it, not to waste it. He knows maybe sometimes we spend maybe a bit too much time worrying about how we can get more. So he understands all those things about just an ordinary day in the lives of ordinary people who are learning to follow Jesus. But more than that, in addition to that, he understands the power of money to engage our hearts and to engage our imaginations. So Richard Foster, one of the spiritual guides of our generation, The Spirit of the Disciplines, is one of his great books. writing about money, he said, one of the most dangerous things about money, get this phrase, is its ability to inspire devotion. Its ability to inspire, it can get a hold of our heart. It can become for us, this is my commentary on what he was saying, it can become for us a fully functioning idol, by which I mean it can become that thing in our lives that more often than not has the final say in how we make our decisions and how we use our time and our energy. Which is probably why Jesus not only made that statement about you can't serve God and money, but why in his day-to-day teaching he brought up the subject of money on so many occasions. In the Gospels, where we have the records of the life and the teaching and the ministry of Jesus, people who sort of take note of these things tell us that the one topic in all his teaching about the kingdom of God, the one topic Jesus spoke about more than anything else was money. Apparently, he said more about money than he did about prayer. We get the idea that he understands that it's important. He never said that money should be ignored. He never said that it's bad. But he did warn that it is powerful and therefore can become dangerous. If you let it, it can dictate the course of your life. If you let it, it can become the final and ultimate measure of everything in your life. And not just for us as individuals, but with our governments and the way that we vote and with corporations and why they exist and how they treat people. It can all come down to money. That's what a fully functioning idol. So the translation there says, you can't serve God and money. Older translations said, you can't serve God and mammon. Remember that word mammon? And mammon I always took was not so much money as in the $5 bill that's on your table or what you have in your bank account or the investments or whatever. It's not that particular money. But mammon, I think, is kind of referring to this spirit that money takes on. The spirit behind it that drives it and gives it this power. So the power of it rather than the actual money. And this is probably, I think it would be fair to say in most cases, this is the most powerful idol in our culture. And it finds a welcoming home in the human heart. Because the other thing Jesus knew was how seductive we find those words more and newer and bigger and better. And so with the human heart set up like that and the power of money, mammon and the human heart make for a dangerous couple. And it's not, see, the problem is not that any of us would actually come to believe that money is the answer to everything. We're not that gullible. It's just that with the pace of life and the cultural climate in which we live that has such influence on us, it's possible to get into a way of living as though we believe that that's true, without even realizing that we've crossed that line. And so the warning here is, don't let money call the shots. Don't let it seduce you with empty promises. If you do, it'll grind you down and it will wear you out, because that's what idols do. When it has the final say, it can give you an ugly spirit. It can rob you of the joy of your life. It can send you down dead-end trails so far that one day you'll look up and realize, maybe too late, that you're actually quite lost. We drop our voices and we whisper reverentially like we're praying or entering the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem. Do you know how much that guy's worth? You can be a total idiot. I hope you're not, but you could be. You could be a total idiot. But if you're rich, a lot of people will treat you with respect just because of that. But it's a terrible way to keep score in life. So one day Jesus was out teaching, and a man came up and he said, I'm having a problem with my brother over some finances and inheritance in our family, and you seem to know what you're talking about. Can you just talk to my brother and straighten this out? And Jesus said, well, actually, no, that's not the business I'm in. But he took advantage of it. He turned to the crowd and he said to them, so listen, don't get yourself into a situation like this. Always remember that your life does not consist, great phrase, in the abundance of your possessions. Life does not, he said, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. And you and I, we live in and we are shaped on a daily basis by a culture that's prepared to go toe-to-toe with Jesus on this and say, oh yes, it is. My life does consist in the abundance of my possessions, what I have and what I do with it. Understand that the Bible doesn't say, as is frequently misquoted, that money is the root of all evil. It says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and that many people in its pursuit have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And there's a great thought for you to discuss with your small group. Christian writer Frederick Buechner said, if this world is sane, then Jesus is mad as a hatter. Because he just takes this and turns it upside down. So that's the negative side. There's lots more that could be said about this, but you're smart people. I think I've made my point. Does anybody not understand what I'm saying? So let's look at the positive side. It's not only that Jesus knew the power of money and all these things and the spirit behind it. Jesus knew a better way. He just knew a better way. He knew that we're not created to serve this idol of mammon. He knows that we were created to live our lives under the kingly rule of Jesus and to learn to live our lives in terms of the new life of God's kingdom or God's kingly reign. So the statement from Jesus that you can't serve both God and mammon is not primarily not a threat. He's saying, I'm warning you, do that, you'll pay big time with my Father and me. He's not saying, if you do this, you are in big trouble. Like God is not going to stand. He's not issuing a threat like that. He's doing a serious caution here, trying to avert a tragedy. Trying to avert a tragedy in our lives. Trying to avoid a tragedy in our countries and in our corporations. He's saying that if you do this, if you do come in on the side of the money, whether intentionally or not, it means that you will miss out on the best life that God has to offer you. And that God's mission in reclaiming this whole world from evil and sin, God's expectations and promise of the new creation, is going to lose out on your talents, and your strengths and your resources, in the places where you live and have influence. You won't be able to share in the work of God and find the fulfillment that God brings to you in his graciousness in that work. At some point, see, Jesus understands this, at some point, your attitude towards money and finances and what you do in that area will determine the limits of your capacity for spiritual growth. And the true adventure of our faith is how deep we can go and how wide we can go as we continue to become more and more like Jesus and live this new life under the reign of God. Comes with an understanding and a trust that Jesus is not out to shortchange any of us. He invites us to do a deep dive into the abundant life, to drink freely of the living water of life that he promised, not to wear ourselves out in pursuit of lesser things in a desperate longing or search for satisfaction and fulfillment. Not hoping that this will be our security, only to find that life brings us to a point where the issues of our security can't be touched by the money we've accumulated. Not with the false promise that if you just get a little bit more, you'll finally be satisfied, because you discover there's actually no limit in your heart to that word more. To those who are thirsty for the life of the kingdom, Jesus says, look around at the pagans and see how they live, running around in a frenzy, worrying themselves to death, wearing themselves out in pursuit of these things. Don't be like that. He says it's no way to live. Come to me. Drink deeply of the refreshing water of life. Seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness. All these things will be added as well. He's saying put first things first. The rest will all get sorted out in the process. He says, this is great, look at the flowers in the field. Look at the birds of the air. Was he the first one to come up with this? Stop and smell the roses? He's saying, without letting these worries drive your life, you'll be able to stop and look at the flowers. You'll be able to stop and listen to the birds singing. You'll enjoy the song, and you'll be reminded you have a gracious Father in heaven who knows all your needs before you even bring them to him. And there's more. Jesus knew that in learning to live the life of God's kingly reign, that we at some point discover a counter-truth about ourselves. That instead of being designed and shaped to get all that we can and to keep all that we can, that the truth about us is that we've actually been designed in our gracious, or in our deepest nature, by a gracious God to be givers. And that's woven into our very DNA. And that in learning to give, that we will find these things that Mammon has promised, but can't deliver in the end. So it's something each of us need to be aware of about ourselves, which is that God designed us in creation to give. And you'll never learn that anywhere but in church, created in the image of God to live with radical generosity. So one of those great prophets of our age, Woody Allen, said one time in a particularly deep thought, it's hard to know what actually does bring happiness, he said. Neither money nor poverty seem to work. Brilliant, just brilliant. I think part of the answer is that generosity contributes to happiness. And a little reflection on our life experience probably vindicates that, because for most of us, the times of greatest joy in our lives and satisfaction have been when we've been part of something bigger than ourselves, working with other people for a good commitment, and we're being able to be generous and use our resources and our talents to help make a difference. We've been designed by God in that way. Generosity, because we're created in the image of God, brings out the best in us. It leads to deep joy, expressing our true nature, which we've been misled for a long time. When we're being generous, we're being at our best. That's why, as Christians, at a time like this when we're doing a financial thing, we don't ever want to hear the phrase, give till it hurts. That's for the secular world. That's for the pagans. We want to say, give till it feels good. Give till you get right there where God created you to be. Give till it feels good. Now, if you're new to this, and you haven't exercised those muscles of generosity a whole lot, initially you may feel some pain. But it's not the pain of breaking a bone or breaking a leg, it's the pain of stretching. It's the pain that comes with starting to get into shape, toning your muscles. You break through that, you gently push through it until that exercise starts to feel good. We don't give until it hurts. We work through that. We give till it feels good, trusting that that's how God created us. And here's the thing. Giving is the single greatest aid to breaking the power of mammon in our hearts and minds. It's the best antidote there is. The true miracle in learning to live generously is not like some of the TV preachers tell you that whatever you give to God's work, God will give you 10 times back. That would be a miracle. I just don't happen to believe it. I think the miracle is that in becoming radically generous, there's a greater miracle that God will replace. There's a greater miracle than that. The big miracle is that God will change your heart so that you learn to be content with less. So don't get yourself trapped in a lifestyle and value system that means you can't afford to be generous. If you do, you'll never be happy anyway. Joy comes from generosity, not from acquisition. So that's what I want to say about that. And then I got just a couple of random thoughts. So just change your channel for a minute. Take a deep breath. I hope I've made my points. So then I just want to say a couple other things. I mentioned this one time, previously preaching here. One of the ways to sort of get yourself in a frame of mind for this is deep inside you to just take a little thought about your life and to make a decision as a follower of Jesus. You made it, make it again, that you're going to choose gratitude as the lens through which you look at life. Gratitude to God, and then gratitude for everything around you. And that's pretty hard in a culture that spends billions of dollars a year trying to wind you up and make sure you're never quite content. But choose gratitude. And instead of thinking more, try to think thank you. Because gratitude opens the door to contentment. And gratitude and contentment together open the door to generosity. So that's one thing. Second thing is this. There's a myth that we can tell ourselves that when I have more, I'll be able to start living generously. But right now, that's not possible. That's probably not true, that if you can't do it now, you will do it then. Jesus went out of his way on a few occasions to say, if you're faithful with a little bit, you'll be faithful when you have a lot. But if you're not faithful with a little bit, you probably don't have much chance when you have a lot. So even though it seems insignificant in the big picture, the little bit that you can start with is huge in determining the pattern that you walk on in life. And then there's this question. There's always this question. So how much should I give? Man, I would love to just give you a number. I've been in churches where they say, well, we've got 100 people and we need $100,000, so that's $1,000 each. That's not Jesus kind of math. That's not Jesus kind of math. My suggestion is that we want to get to be the kind of people who say, how much can I give? But in answer to the understandable question, how much should I give? I'd suggest a little bit more than you're comfortable with. If you're going to grow, you need to stretch yourself. So make a commitment to give enough that you have to say, Lord, if I'm going to be able to carry through on this, I'm going to need your help. I'm going to need you constantly reminding me of my priorities, keeping first things first, trusting you. But on the other hand, don't give any more than you can give joyfully. Because God loves a joyful giver, And if you give something out of duty, you're in spiritual danger of thinking, say it, I'm pretty good after all, rather than understanding that you're dependent on the grace of God. So somewhere between a bit more than you feel comfortable with, but not more than you can give joyfully, and God will meet you there, I'm sure, and bless you and bless the ministry. So put money in its proper place and make sure it stays there. It's a terrible master. On the other hand, it's a wonderful resource and service for good. It can make your life rich for sure. It can do all kinds of good things. Make it a servant of the kingdom. St. Paul said to the church in Corinth, just as you excel in every other issue of the Christian life, make sure that you excel in this grace of giving. Thanks be to God.